Hey everybody, it's PartyElite, and today we're taking a look at Desynced, a very interesting game that's right around the corner that, in my humble opinion, can best be described as a high-tech or more digitally inclined version of Factorio. Where Factorio has you building automations using mechanical processes like conveyor belts and robotic arms, Desynced asks you to utilize programming in both simple and complex forms in a variety of circumstances that are equal parts challenging and rewarding. If you like what you see here today, make sure you add the game to your wishlist. It's a great way to support indie developers especially, as it helps the game get visibility on Steam. Apart from that, if you enjoy this video, consider hitting the like button. Now, without further ado and with timestamps down below, let's begin. The absolute basics. You find yourself isolated on an alien planet after your mothership is damaged. With little to go on, you need to build a base of operations from which to collect resources that'll help repair said mothership and presumably get out of Dodge. You start with just a few drones, a scout, and a central command structure, but that's all you need to get the ball rolling. And the absolute basics here will be familiar to fans of the genre. You need to acquire resources of varying types using miners, then you need to process them into more complex materials, and then use those to build more things to acquire even more complex resources, and so on and so forth. While you start with access to just 3 raw materials in iron, crystals, and silica, your exploration of the procedurally generated planet eventually leads you to find an alien presence and blight. There are ores infused with blight that are required for certain advanced structures and units, and blight in its gaseous form can be acquired from the air in areas that have a great concentration of it, introducing a new method of resource acquisition that in turn requires technological advancements on your part. That aside, you'll come across ruins from time to time, and with resources and a bit of patience, the ruins will provide you with hard-to-acquire resources, as well as a bit more backstory for the planet itself. Not all is as it first appears, it seems. Inevitably, you'll find yourself expanding around alien hives, and then you'll need to establish defensive and offensive capabilities to keep your colony alive and operational. The number of resources you'll be managing gets quite large quite quickly, and on top of that, you need to keep an eye on your power levels, the distribution of said power, and the connectivity levels of your network, a very unique element here that determines how smoothly your colony operates, as we'll discuss in a later segment in this video. Power generation can be done through the use of non-renewable resources or with the help of solar and wind power combined with batteries for storage, but you need to get there through research first. The tech tree here is quite large, mostly locked at first with different categories of research that imply some interesting twists and turns as far as the story is concerned, and there are also some really interesting ideas with regards to progression that tie into more complex elements that helps Desynced stand out. So why don't we investigate some of these more unique elements? Modular structures. Of the many differentiators in Desynced, one that'll stand out soonest is how its buildings and units operate. While from time to time you'll get a building or unit which is purpose-built for one thing, most times these buildings and units are just a combination of empty slots of varying sizes. Some of these are for external components and others for internals. Some buildings and units will lack access to certain module sizes, and that aside, there are quite a few considerations when you're figuring out exactly what combination of modules to put together. For one, purpose. What are you hoping this particular building or unit will accomplish? Is it a mining drone? Alright, pop a mining unit on it. Is it meant to produce simple resources? Is it supposed to produce slightly more complex ones? Do you want it to be capable of building additional drones? Does it generate power? Does it extend the network that connects your drones and buildings for automation purposes, as we'll discuss in the next section? Maybe you throw on a turret for defensive purposes, or maybe you pop on a scanning device to help find resources. Whatever the case might be, you can change and interchange these modules, swapping at will based on what you need at any given time or place. And yes, anything you can put on a building, you can put on a unit and make it mobile, as long as the right kinds of slots are available. But you have to think about more than just the module slots available to you, of course. For one, you want to keep proximity to other elements top of mind. Resources here are physicalized, which means there's no central hub from which a production building or unit magically draws resources from. They are stored in specific places, and they need to be picked up from said storage locations and delivered to where they're needed for processing. Building a fluid and efficient system then requires some planning in terms of placement. Even though there aren't any conveyor belts, you still need to consider distances and paths between points of interest. Apart from that, each building has a different capacity as far as its inventory is concerned too. Processed goods require raw materials for processing and the appropriate component as well. You need room for those raw materials to sit, and you need room for the output as well. Otherwise, there's nowhere for the finished product to go. The size of the building determines how many inventory slots it'll have, and the goods you're trying to produce will determine how many you'd need. Sometimes a building will have enough slots for multiple manufacturing modules, but not enough inventory space to hold all the raw materials you'd need alongside empty space for the outputs as well. It becomes an interesting puzzle process then as you try to maximize the use of each individual module in each individual building and unit. And with some clever automation, you can actually get buildings to change their production based on local stock as well as global inventory, and you can even get them to swap out modules if needed, adding another variable to the equation of what you put in a building or unit's inventory. And I want to clarify that yes, again, both units and buildings are able to manufacture and process end products and resources, and they can both be equipped with power generation modules, network modules, turrets, and anything else that can fit on their slots. The modular nature of it all is really quite intense, and perfecting your builds is a very fun part of the challenge, especially when you factor in automation. At first, you'll only have access to very basic levels of automation, specifying where goods get dropped off, locking inventory slots for specific goods, or requesting modules and resources at a destination with any free unit able to respond to the call. You can also tell units to specifically act as transports, telling them where to pick things up and drop them off, allowing miners, for example, to stay at the source rather than ferrying what they're extracting over to a storage location. While you can manually do a lot of this, more basic elements are completely automated, of course. Desynced doesn't just add complexity for complexity's sake, it's all quite purposeful. One thing you need to be wary of, though, is your network strength and connectivity. You can choose to disconnect a unit from the network if you want to remove it from the automation systems, but if you want to keep it connected, you need to make sure your network is active in the area. This might seem simple at first, but when you expand and explore, you might inevitably end up in places without access to your network, and that can lead to some spicy situations. But on the topic of complexity, let's discuss more advanced forms of automation. Eventually, after establishing an uplink and digging into the tech tree, you'll gain access to behavioral modules. These can be installed as an internal module on any building or unit with an internal slot, which is almost all of them, and it can be programmed using a node-based interface. You can swap these modules between buildings and units, and they'll preserve their programming, so as your colony grows, you'll be able to move these pieces around as and when needed without having to redo the programming. Taking a look at the node-based editor, you can quickly see how things can get really granular. There are a multitude of nodes that can take a variety of things into consideration, and you can even add custom parameters that you can then assign to further fine-tune your automations. Now, as far as I could tell, you absolutely do not need to engage with these systems if you don't want to. While they can help with optimizations and efficiencies, if looking at the node-based editor starts to cause heart palpitations, you can completely ignore it. If you do get into it though, you can do quite a bit. For example, here's a program that counts how many of a raw material is sitting in the associated building's inventory, and if it falls below a number, it requests a shipment of 20. While I didn't need this at first, eventually this helped keep a constant flow of raw materials to some key manufacturing buildings that would otherwise wait until they were out of raw materials to request resources, slowing my entire production chain down. Here's an automation that checks how much of a resource the entire colony has, and depending on that number, the building completely changes what it's producing. This ensures that a building isn't uselessly producing a good that I already have a surplus of, and it also ensures that any single manufacturing building is being productive at all times. This works another way too. If my colony starts to lack a specific resource, I can tell buildings to automatically stop producing goods that need said resource, switching to something else instead. Or how about this one, that automatically orders a unit to retreat when it takes a certain amount of damage? The options are quite wild, and to be frank, I haven't even been able to explore all of them myself yet. You can run programs based on all kinds of operations, from checking to see if there's room for a certain item in the inventory to checking the altitude or current blightness level of the current location. It's a really cool tool that I'm really excited to see people bend to their will. People far more clever than me will come up with all sorts of wild automations, and this is the crux of my earlier description of the game. It's like a high-tech digital version of Factorio, where your automations aren't based off of conveyor belts and other analog devices, but ones and zeros that you program into your drones and buildings. Desynced is a fascinating game that I think you should absolutely keep an eye on if you like games in the same vein as Factorio, Satisfactory, etc., etc. If it piques your interest, make sure you wishlist it on Steam to get notified when it finally releases, and again, it's a great way to support indie developers in particular. Apart from that, if you found this video interesting, consider sharing it to spread the word about the game, and don't hesitate to hit the like button. If you have any thoughts or questions, drop them in the comments below and I'll answer all that I can. For more strategy, sim, and management gaming, don't hesitate to subscribe to the channel, and as always, a massive thanks goes out to all of the channel members and patrons who've been supporting the channel on a monthly basis. Y'all keep us alive and running smoothly, and of course, a big old thanks goes out to each and every one of you for watching. Until next time, cheers.